go. Good morning. There we go. Okay. In praise of small things. Oh, yeah, and electronic things too. So we start this morning with the Gospel of Mark, because I like to start with the Gospel anyway. And it's useful to remember that each of the Gospels has their own thing going on here. And Mark is sort of the Gospel you want to read while on a treadmill, because it's always like hurry, 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 run, zoom, zoom, zoom. That's Mark. Or maybe like you want to listen to it while jogging, right? So, and immediately, right? So Jesus was just down south on the on the Jordan River with John the Baptist, and then John gets arrested, and so Jesus goes up a little north into Galilee, and then he goes to synagogue, and then immediately he rushes to Peter and Simon's house, and then he's just about to sit down, and then, oh, by the way, my mother-in-law's ill, right? And then he goes off zooming off somewhere else. This is the Gospel of Mark. In that way, Jesus is not like the Buddha, sort of the picture of the Buddha who's sitting under his tree. I kind of imagine, right, the Buddha sitting there under his tree, and Jesus comes jogging up and going, "Hey, are you still sitting there under your tree?" And the Buddha goes, "Are you still running around?" And the two of them laugh, and off they go, right? So that's sort of my contribution to world understanding for today. So this story, immediately after the synagogue service, where Jesus has kicked the demon out of somebody, he goes to Simon and Andrew's house. And so it's worth imagining that. Fortunately, we don't actually have to completely imagine that. We've got a picture this morning. Philip, did you get that?
No, I did not get that. It's not. It was not attached to the email. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. So if you've got like an electronic gizmo in front of you, which in fact all of you do, you could go to something like Capernaum reconstruction, and there'd be a little picture. And the picture has a fair bit of accuracy to it, because the town of Capernaum was sort of abandoned at some point in, I don't know exactly in which century, and then they've dug it up, the remains of it. And so there are like stubs of walls and the remains of a synagogue and things like that. And it's not, I mean, you got a bunch of rocks ultimately piled up. And so trying to reconstruct a village on the basis of a bunch of piled up rocks can be a bit tricky, but there are definitely walls. And so you can get some sense of what this, and I always like to have some sense of what this might have looked like, because it says Simon and Andrew's house, right? Well, do they live together? And like, why do they live together? And how does that all work? And honestly, we don't know, right? But it is, again, I always think it's worth thinking about this stuff, because it makes it a little bit more real, that these are actually real people. These are real places. Stuff is happening in people's houses. So anyway, they get there, and Simon's mother-in-law is ill, right? Which leads us to wonder, so where's Simon's wife in the gospel? Because in order to have a mother-in-law, you need to have a wife, and maybe she's dead, but no reason to believe that. Which also means that Simon is old enough, right? He's not 15, but we have no idea otherwise how old Simon is. And this is important, right? It's important because Simon, who becomes Peter at some point, he's running around Galilee with Jesus, at least a significant chunk of the time. And who's at home, right? Because someone's got to be at home doing the farming, so that when Simon comes home, he has food to eat. And if he's got a wife, he probably also has children, and someone's got to be taking care of them kids while he's running around the world with Jesus. Sort of like, Martin Luther King Jr. is running around America doing this and that, and somebody's at home taking care of his kids because they all survived, right? I don't think Thich Nhat Hanh had any, but the rest of us do, or at least many of the rest of us do, right? So anyway, there's all these characters. But anyway, so Jesus gets there, and he sits down, or maybe he doesn't even get seated, And Simon goes, hey, my mother-in-law, she's ill. Can you do something? And he doesn't even know, right? He's seen Jesus do an exorcism, but otherwise, this is Jesus' first healing. So you got to figure, well, he can do an exorcism. Maybe he can do healings too. Let's give it a shot. What I want us to notice this morning, mostly, however, is the physicality of the encounter. Presumably, Jesus could have sat down and gone, healed, and just gone on with lunch. But he didn't. He gets up and goes to wherever she is, and he takes her by the hand, and he lifts her up. I just want you to imagine that. But I don't want you to imagine somebody else. I want you to imagine you yourself. That you are this woman lying on the bed. She's not possibly very sick. She has a fever. And let's face it, we've all got stuff. We've all got reasons that this morning it would have just been nicer to lie there in bed. And for some reason you didn't, or maybe some of you on Zoom still are. I don't know. But we've all got stuff. So just imagine you're lying there in bed and, just be nice to lie there. But you got to get up anyway. And so Jesus comes up, takes you by the hand, and lifts you up. Don't really need more sermon than that, but we got more time. So then he does this, right? And hopefully Jesus also does this to you. And then it says she ministers to them. She serves them would be a more traditional. We don't know what she does. It's quite possible that she starts making food and serves them food. But Jesus has also just been, right, just came up from the sea, from the Jordan River, where his friend has been arrested. And maybe he's still dealing with that, because this is the Roman government who arrested him, probably, and they're quite good at chopping off heads or hands or feet or, various body bits just to deal with situations that are not a long trial process. So Jesus could be significantly worried about his friend John. Maybe he just needs Simon's mother-in-law to come and sit down with him. Say, hey, it's in God's hands. We don't know what she does. May just have been soup, who knows? But the Greek word here is diakonon, from which we get our word deacon. She deacons him, whatever that is. So I looked up the definition of diakonon, and the one I liked for this morning was to attend to anything that may serve another's interest. Anything that may serve another's interest, do that. Now, this word, of course, goes on to become one of the primary offices of the church, deacons, right? To be a deacon is to care for someone actively, or to sit on a committee, depending on how you do the job. In many churches, this is traditionally a man's role. When I grew up in the church, only men could be deacons. I like that idea. I like that idea because if there are 3 men and 1 woman on the deacon committee, who's going to do all the work? It's probably the woman. Not always, but often enough. So, if it's all men, then the men are the ones who have to do the work because they're the ones who are the deacons, unless they simply, tell their wives to do it. I don't know. That's not such a bad idea. In our church, the Constitution says we have deacons. I suspect many of you didn't know that. Right? It doesn't say how many, but it says that they are elected to 3-year terms. Officially, of course, we have none. But unofficially, I like to think that we have about 60 of them. Because that's what we do. One of the things that we do, we actively care for each other's interests. Right? And of course, it isn't limited to the church. Right? It isn't like actively care only for your friend's interests. That would be a very un-Jesus sort of definition of deacon. But it is primarily not an office, it's an action. And it's these small things. Right? In the story, it probably means serve someone some food. Or who knows? And Jesus himself, in his action, also did a relatively small thing. She had a fever. Then she didn't have a fever. That was it. And, he didn't have lunch, and suddenly he did have lunch. Another small thing in return. And that's not always the picture, right? So the psalm we read, I don't know if you remember all the way back to Sam reading the psalm, right? The psalm was all about the big God doing the big stuff, right? Come and do this, right? And you have the omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent God doing one of the big omni things in the world. That's a different picture of how God works in the world. And of course, it invites us, therefore, to be part of the big things that go on, is to try to do big things, to be God-like, just to do big things. Or, another picture is the picture that we saw in 1 Timothy that Sam just read, right? You had, right, in the latter days, whenever that is, right, these people are going to come, presumably inside the church, and they will prohibit marriage and require abstinence from certain foods. So folks in the church who seem to believe that their job is to tell everybody else what not to do, which tells us that the latter days means like every day since then, because there've always been people in the church who've been doing stuff like that. And, this particular thing that Paul is worried about here is no marriage and not eating certain foods. In other words, control of the bodies of others. Some things don't change. Right? So we have these three different models of what it means to be godlike, what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And we've got the first big one, right? The smiting model of, God will smite our enemies and we should smite our enemies and we're just going to do these big things. That's model number one. Got the Timothy model of controlling everybody, telling everybody what to do. This is right and this is wrong, and thou shalt not this and thou shalt not that. And the third model, right, is the deacon model. Anything that serves another's interest. And we get to choose because they're all biblical models. Paul doesn't recommend the second one, but the Psalms recommends the first one. But I would recommend the third one. Go out there and deacon. Like to stay here and deacon, not exclusively, also to be served, which for some of you I realize is much harder than serving is. So, in praise of small things. Amen.